The Amazing Spider-Man series, in my opinion, is misunderstood. Yes, it contains some strange and at some points infuriating narrative choices, but it's also a take on Spider-Man that's entirely new. It's darker, with the films focusing on intriguing themes like time and loss. This darker tone allows for some crazy takes on some of Spider-Man's popular villains, and I love it. It's realistic, and while that does take away the personality from these classic villains, it's still a fascinating take. Let's jump into my reviews of them both, and why not put your own thoughts down in the comments below? I'd love to hear them. If you've already watched my individual reviews, you can always just skip ahead because near the end, I'll be talking about my thoughts on the Amazing Spider-Man series overall. So sit back, grab some snacks, and enjoy. The Amazing Spider-Man is a wild adaptation. It's really brave of Sony to even go ahead with the style of this movie, considering how much darker and realistic it is. When you think of Spider-Man, you think of a very vibrant and eye-catching character. But when you watch this movie, it shies away from all of that to give us something we had never seen before in terms of thematic choices. Yes, it wastes half of the movie on Peter's origins and Uncle Ben's death, but it still feels unique because of this change in tone.
I do feel an obligation to the audience to make something worthy of the Spider-Man mantle. And it's hard, but such is life.
So let's go back to when Sony decided to reboot this franchise and why they landed on such a somber take of the character. With The Amazing Spider-Man releasing just 5 years after Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, it makes you wonder why they didn't just develop a fourth movie in that franchise. And while I would have wanted that, and still do want that, Sony had different ideas. Once they saw the criticism of Spider-Man 3, they were ready to take the character in a new direction. Sam Raimi's exit from the fourth movie in 2010 only solidified this, leading to Sony almost instantly putting another Spider-Man movie into production, thus creating The Amazing Spider-Man. The first of many wild choices Sony took with this adaptation was its director, Mark Webb. Now, his filmography at this point was similar to John Watts' filmography before Homecoming. There's nothing of any real experience here when it comes to big budget movies apart from Webb's direction of 500 Days of Summer, which is a great movie, and you can see its tropes used in similar ways during the romantical moments in The Amazing Spider-Man, but it makes me wonder if they hire these upcoming malleable directors to make it easier for Sony to implement their, let's call it, illogical storytelling. Now, that statement feels like it's degrading Mark Webb's work when I say it out loud, and I don't mean to do that. His involvement here is definitely visible, and my god does it look astounding. His effort of implementing practical effects where he could helped bring that realism to the film. These movies are renowned for its effects, particularly in the swinging, and I have to agree there are some shots here that are stunning. My favourite technical shot though is where we see Spidey's POV. Those first person moments were beautiful. As I've mentioned, it's a lot darker this time around, leading to some very hard to see action pieces, which is a shame because this suit is incredible, and we can barely see it. For some reason, I love it. The way it matches the realism of this movie is what makes it so unique, and although the suit in the second film is more comic accurate, there's something about the experimental idea of the first suit that just hits. There are probably multiple reasons why Sony decided to go for a grittier tone this time around. However, I think the biggest factor was Nolan's Batman. His trilogy changed the way comic book movies were interpreted, and I think Sony were just looking for a change and ended up influenced by it. Honestly, well done to them. The film's cinematography is definitely one of my favourite aspects of this movie. The casting of Andrew Garfield has aged incredibly well. I always enjoyed Andrew's performance as Peter, and honestly I thought I was a part of a small fan base who actually appreciated it. But since No Way Home, I've come to realise the amount of love there is for him, and it's wholesome seeing that. His depiction as Peter is odd, but in a good way. They represent him as this cooler, more alternative teenager who is also quite the loner, borrowing some of comic Peter's characteristics, and I find that quite compelling. It's not your average nerd from the 60s comics. He's got some personality to him, and it feels modernized this way. When we see him as Spidey, he brings a quippish and humorous take on the character, even more so than Tobey's Spider-Man, and it can be quite funny at times.
Is that a real knife? Yes, it's a real knife. My weakness, it's small knives.
Although he can come across as a tad egotistical when dealing with his adversaries, which does not fit his character. Emma Stone's portrayal as Gwen is perfect. Her and Andrew's connection is felt through the screen, and it seems as though they felt it in real life too. I think she matches the classic Gwen from the comics. She's confident, especially when standing up to Flash, and she's smart. I mean, she is a head intern at Oscorp, right?
I'm in trouble.
Her father is another interesting addition to the movie, as this obnoxious and argumentative guy who believes Spider-Man is this no-good vigilante, in some ways playing a J. Jonah Jameson type. His death near the end is heartbreaking, and he leaves Peter with a horrible promise to keep, only for Peter to just ignore it and then feel bad, and then feel extremely bad.
Stay with me, stay with me.
Rhys Ifans' Dr. Kurt Connors is an intense scientist searching for a solution to cross-species genetics. He seems like a great antagonist at first. That is until he starts talking to himself and has a very evil but basic mastermind plan to turn everyone into a lizard. Once it hit that phase, I just couldn't take it very seriously. I have to say, choosing the lizard as Spidey's first villain was a perfect choice. If they had changed his appearance to be more like the comic style with that big snout and the lab coat, and changed his motives, then it would have been brilliant. Still, we get some incredible battles between them both. My favourite has to be the school fight. Not only do we get a great cameo of Stan Lee, but we get an intelligent use of Peter's powers and see how agile he can really be. Of course, we get Uncle Ben and Aunt May. I don't know how I feel about these two. May feels really underutilized once Ben dies, and honestly, Ben's death felt very stale compared to his death in the original trilogy. I will say his death was visceral to see. To be fair, both of the deaths in this movie were fairly violent for a Spider-Man film. I can vividly remember going to the cinema to watch this movie. I must have been around 10 when this came out, which makes me feel young and old at the same time, but I adored this movie. Rewatching it now, I can see its mistakes. It doesn't hit as hard as I thought it did, and geez, this movie is incredibly long. The first half of the movie is somewhat dull, giving us a reimagining of his origin, and it can drag, while the second half is where we get that classic Spider-Man action, and it's awesome. The final battle, however, is where this film truly fell flat. I was expecting something bigger, or at least something emotionally deeper than what we were given. The lizard's plan to lizardize everyone just came out of nowhere, and that's what made the final act so underwhelming. I hope my love for this movie didn't get in the way when creating this review. I do have my own gripes that I've talked about, like its pacing, but it's a fresh take on the character. There's many versions in the comics, and bringing this character's potential through to the big screen is always fun to see. I'm glad this version exists. It's a version of the character that we didn't know we needed. This movie goes to show how versatile an icon like Spider-Man is. He's quippy, thoughtful, and lovable, but at the same time, this character takes us to some very depressing and lonely places. And I think this movie walks that line perfectly. You know what? I like The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I feel like I'm licking Sony's boots when I say that, and trust me, I hate them for making the exact same mistakes here as they did in Spider-Man 3, but this movie definitely has its positives. No matter what stupid subplot or foreboding of some Oscorp Sinister Six they had going on, it continues to capture some incredible effects and unique takes on Spidey's villains. It isn't afraid of taking risks, and that's why I enjoy this film.
The beauty of Spider-Man is he's owning the symbol and he's making it more that open, warm protector that kids feel reassured and excited by.
Yo, Sparkle!
The Amazing Spider-Man 2 surprisingly had a smaller budget than the first, with it being around $200 million. And when you look at the action scenes here compared to the first, it makes you wonder how the previous film cost so much more at $230 million. We get the same director, Mark Webb, who was actually reluctant to return unless he was given a pay rise from the $1 million he received from the first one. I guess when you're the linchpin of this new universe and Sony are raking in $720 million from this sequel alone, you're going to want a pay rise. The film's writing process seems to be messy, which fits in line with the turnout of this movie. The initial screenplay was written by James Vanderbilt. The draft was then rewritten by Roberto Orci, Alex Kurtzman, and Jeff Pinkner. Andrew Garfield was quoted saying the first script focused more on Peter and Gwen's relationship, Green Goblin's descent into madness, and expanded on Electro's evolution. But of course, Sony wanted the rewrite to include more villains from the comics like Felicia Hardy, the Rhino, and multiple other nods towards a future of spin-offs and sequels. Although it sadly doesn't keep as much of a darker tone than its predecessor, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 still feels realistic, especially in its interpretations of its characters. Electro, for example, is a genuinely good adaptation of the character. It brings some nuance and modernization to a classic villain. The use of Electro's powers brought some vibrance to the sequel. His materialization when turning into pure energy is really cool, and that final battle between him and Spidey was something I've always wanted to see in live action, and they do it beautifully. The Green Goblin we get this time around is honestly the weirdest choice in terms of his appearance. He's diseased and ugly looking, but comes across as a terrifying antagonist. His suit is quite minimal, but the prototype style fits within the context of the movie. However, his transformation into the Green Goblin felt very rushed. Spidey's suit is genuinely amazing. It's clearly based upon the early 2000s Ultimate Spider-Man comics. I'm reading that right now and it is a masterpiece. The suit is amazing. I get where people are coming from when they say that this is their favorite suit. The realism of this one is unlike anything I've seen on screen before. In addition to the swinging, it's a combo that slaps. Talking of the choreography, it's awesome here. The first film had some great use of practical stunts, but it was hard to see and was only really utilized in the final 10 minutes. This time though, it's way more visible and shows off some awesome stunts that holds true to Spider-Man's flexibility. Andrew's Spider-Man hits the hardest during this movie. His wit and genuine friendly neighborhood characteristics are prevalent throughout, and I love it. His interaction with the kid in the final scene is classic Spidey, it's perfect. However, Garfield's Peter Parker is on a whole different spectrum, at least that's what it feels like. There's a few moments throughout this movie where even his acting is subpar, and that's possibly, most likely, due to the script. But even his accent in parts is extremely cringeworthy.
Just one Spider-Man. Or woman, we don't know. For sure.
There's a big revelation that comes to light in this movie, and I feel it takes away from what makes this Spider-Man Spider-Man. We find out that Peter is the only one to possibly gain powers from the lab spider. His dad used his own blood when experimenting on them, meaning only his bloodline can be enhanced by these spiders. This changes everything to do with his origins, and I hate it. This means Peter is now special. The whole thing about Spider-Man that makes him great is that he's not special. He's just an ordinary kid who gets bit out of the blue and then becomes a hero. Okay, I have a lot to talk about when it comes to Gwen Stacy. She is what makes The Amazing Spider-Man so amazing. Emma Stone's and Andrew Garfield's chemistry is visible, and I loved each scene between them. That's why her death is a monumental moment and is a big reason I enjoy this movie. Like I said, it takes risks, and boy, her death was a big one. Everything to do with the clock tower scene is epic. The Goblin's insanity, Peter's struggle to cling on to Gwen, and finally her visceral and immediate death. Peter's reaction is saddening, and it's what makes it such an impactful moment. You can see he's in denial at first, and soon after we see him go through the 4 other stages of grief in the final moments of the film. It really is beautifully well done. Harry Osborn is introduced in the movie, and I feel like it wasn't necessary. It fits in perfectly with Gwen's death, as it's Green Goblin who does it in the comics, but it does feel like the only reason he was included was because of that. Dane DeHaan does an incredible job as Harry. His depiction and motives are very convincing. On the other hand, there's Jamie Foxx's Electro. His evolution from Max Dillon to Electro is very sudden and it's hard to believe at times. When Max Dillon was his nerdy past self, he was a pushover and never retaliates. Once he's Electro, he suddenly adopts a mean and defensive persona, and it feels unnatural. Aunt May is still on the sidelines in the sequel, and it's sad because she could have been so much more prominent, especially during the Richard Parker subplot. For the flaws section, there's a few things to cover. The most frustrating thing about this film is the fact that they did not learn from their mistakes from Spider-Man 3. They cram in way too much for their own investment for the future franchise, and it's just another case of corporate greed ruining what should be a creative industry. I struggle to connect with most of the characters, like Max Dillon for example. He's a nerd. So much so that they made him out to be this crazy Spider-Man fanatic, and it's creepy. Not only that, but I'm certain this man has schizophrenia. Honestly, the only parts in this movie I like are either within the action pieces or the moments between Gwen and Peter. Even then, those moments can feel very strange. There's scenes in this film that feel like a fan movie on YouTube. It's hard to explain. It could be due to the dialogue, which I found to be messy and underdeveloped in parts. What really grinds my gears about this film is that they could have polished off the most underwhelming and forgettable subplot with one scene near the end, and that was the return of Peter's father. Now, I don't think I can forgive Sony for not putting this in the film. It would have put a perfect bow on the mystery of Peter's parents that has been an underlying plot for both movies now. I urge you to go and watch this deleted scene. You'll get where I'm coming from. I'd love to hear what you think. Its negatives definitely outweigh the positives, and due to this, it falls to the bottom of the pile when it comes to the Spider-Man movies. I think the hardest thing about watching this film in 2026 is seeing what could have been. The amount of possibilities and stories to be told in this universe was something I was looking forward to. The gritty and realistic vibes that this version of the character is depicted in is what makes me miss it. Maybe more than I probably should. Thanks for sticking around. Pun intended. I'm just going to expand on what I said in the final moments of my Amazing Spider-Man 2 review. With The Amazing Spider-Man only getting 2 films, it does have me wanting more. I feel there's a lot of open-ended stories with Andrew Spidey, and while I'd love to see that, it's also a good thing his story ended where it did. The writing throughout these films has been subpar compared to its predecessor. The tonal shift between both movies is jarring at times, and it does feel like most of the time on the production of the film was spent on the visuals rather than the characters and their development. I feel I have to talk about Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker. Throughout my reviews, I have been somewhat wishy-washy when describing how I feel about his depiction, and while I realise there's a lot of people out there who loved his portrayal, I can't get around it fully. He's incredibly cringeworthy and cocky at times, and although that's most definitely down to the writing, it wedges a gap between me and a character you're supposed to admire. Before anyone says he's supposed to be cocky, he's not. Peter Parker is the most humble character out there, and Andrew's take on him is not it. His ego slightly works when he's Spider-Man because Spidey is supposed to be mouthy, and I think that's why his depiction as Spidey is held at a greater standard. Just to clarify, I have nothing against Andrew Garfield as an actor. He is capable of some amazing things. This is just a key personification that the producers have messed with in order to make the character more unique. You probably gauged this from my reviews, but I enjoyed the tone they set for this version of the character. That mixed with the risky storytelling, I mean, it's bonkers to think they even went ahead with most of this, considering the kid-friendly nature of Spider-Man himself. It's weird and wonderful, and we have to give them credit where credit's due. I still think it would have been so cool if Sony incorporated this Spidey into all the Spider-Man villain films they made, like Venom and Morbius. Those films give off the exact same tone, so it's bizarre to me why they didn't do that. But Sony makes a lot of odd choices. I think the Amazing Spider-Man movies made that very clear. For example, I spoke about the deleted scene of Peter's father, and that wasn't the only deleted scene that would have expanded these films for a third installment. Mary Jane was actually supposed to make her debut in the second film too. She was even cast with Shailene Woodley taking the role and had some scenes already shot. It is a shame that these deleted scenes didn't make it in. I guess if they did introduce MJ, then it would have spoiled Gwen's death in a way. I could go on about this film series all day and still come to the same conclusion of me wanting to see where it goes next. And while there's probably millions of people like me who want the same thing, judging by Andrew's experience and feelings on this franchise, it would be a surprise to see him come back to it fully.
Will Tobey and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man be in Avengers Doomsday as well? No. Unequivocally, fucking no.
And, you know, we work with what we've got, and what we did get, while it was undersaturated and choppy at times, it was an unusual and intriguing depiction.